My man, Paul. Paul, you know I love you. But let's not fall for what they have convinced us of as far as our connection to other people of color. That's a form of white supremacy that we have to rid ourselves of. Now, to say that most of us, some of us today wouldn't consider actual Ethiopians as black Africans. Come on, man. One, Ethiopians are from Africa. They live in Africa. It's part of the continent of Africa. And so the fact that they're not what we would call white, they are considered black. And black comes in many different shades, from the lightest brown to the darkest brown. And even though some people say there's no such thing as black, bullshit. I've seen some people who are black. So to not consider them black Africans, and some people just consider them, that's their personal opinions. And you know, everybody has an opinion. And what does an opinion really matter when we're talking about facts and what's truth? A person who is of color, black, from Africa, Ethiopia is in Africa, they are black Africans. Now you say also for the time, Antiope was more of a distinctive term. This is true, completely true. For a time, anyone who was below, who was in Upper Egypt and below, southward, they would have been called Antiope. Antiope simply means burnt face. Burnt face. So it wasn't a racial slur or anything like that, because racism wasn't invented yet. It was more tribalism, and it was just a way of describing a group of people that, you know, Europeans would have said they were a burnt face. The people themselves would not have considered themselves a burnt face as a negative thing. It was just been a way of describing the people that were surrounding them, the people that were close to them, as a way of just distinguishing themselves from other people, or just describing someone as with like an adjective. So you're right. That would have encompassed many different ethnocentrices, if I can get the word out. So you're absolutely correct on that one. But as far as how we consider things today and what some people consider, some people get mad at people and don't want to consider them, you know, this or that, simply because they don't act in a certain way of culture. And some people, because of white supremacy, won't describe themselves in whatever the negative is of today's culture. Like, you will see people in the Caribbean, for instance, they would rather call themselves Dominicans rather than recognizing that they have an ancestry that goes back to Africa. People who are in the Americas would rather say I'm indigenous instead of recognizing that their ancestry comes from Africa. It always amazes me when people do this, and yet they have absolutely no proof whatsoever of their actual heritage, or their proof only goes back, well, like for myself, I know through my grandmother's side of my grandmother on my mother's side, there is some Creek Indian in there, and they will stop right there and say, oh shit, I'm Creek. My ancestors have always been here. But if I did that, that would negate the other side of my paternal grandmother's family, my maternal grandmother's family, which there is a part of my maternal grandmother's family that comes from Africa. There's a part of my maternal grandmother's ancestry that comes from England. So should I just stop there and say that, well, I'm European? No, I can't claim that. Well, I can, but that's not the end-all be-all of my ancestry. I would then also have to negate my grandfather, my maternal grandfather's side, that comes out of Nigeria. So should I disrespect them as well? But then I would also have to disrespect my father's side of the family, which I know comes from Mali. So I would have to disrespect them. And even some of the ones that are Italian and some of the ones that are Scottish, I would have to disrespect them as well by saying that I am just one thing. But I do recognize that the majority of who I am, the majority of my DNA, comes from Africa. The majority does not come from the indigenous of America, and the majority doesn't come from Europe. So the majority comes from Nigeria and Mali. So I accept those as the primary, because those are the primaries that make up who I am. Those people who try to say, oh, well, I'm Moorish, or I'm this, I'm that, you're just picking out a time in history that you want to claim something. And most people, especially those in America, have absolutely no way of identifying where they came from, and can only go so far back because records just weren't kept very well in North America. You have a lot of people who are of African descent because of cultural terms today don't want to accept that. But give it 100 years, when Africa is, when many African nations will be world powers, they will then want to claim, oh yeah, I'm from Africa, because it's something good. And that's a problem with people. We always want to glorify and claim what's been considered great, or what's considered great at their time frame, and then not consider anything that went through a negative time frame or is in a current negative time frame. So yeah, the Antioch would have encompassed a whole bunch of people all the way down into Sudan, but they didn't really involve themselves with many of the South-Saharan Africans during the time frame that Antioch was being used. But if they had encountered those people, they would have referred to them the same way as Antioch, and that's mainly would have been a Mediterranean, a European Mediterranean term, or North African term that would have, and Levant, which would have been used to describe those people. But it's just an adjective. It's not a racial identification. And as far as there are some Africans, yeah, who've been blinded and don't want to consider themselves black Africans either. And there are some who have been blinded and don't want to consider black people in America to be of African descent. But those are all just personal opinions. And personal opinions don't really matter when it's in the face of facts. So y'all have a great day. Paul, you know I love your comments. My guy, you keep everybody on their toes. But y'all have a great day. And remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.